Good afternoon. I'm Dotty Zales,
I'm Dave Hoferer.
and we're here to present the Dotty and Dave or the Dave and Dotty show, whichever you prefer. Feather your garden with native plants attract native birds. Dave and I are both members of the Les Hills Wild Ones, of course, and we're also members of the Les Hills Audubon Society that meets right here in Sioux City, Iowa, and we meet at Dorothy Pico Nature Center on the first Thursdays of every month. I should say we met at Dorothy Pico. Now we've become Zombies. So we've been holding our meetings that way. Check out our new website, lushillsaudubonsociety.org, about our programs, our field trips, our local birding, and opportunities for you. Among Dave's many activities is biology department chairman at Briarcliff University. And my husband and I are landowners in the Les Hills, south of Westfield on the Ridge Road. Natural areas and the wildlife species that inhabit them face ever increasing pressure from human activity. But there is hope. Each one of you is that hope. You can choose to create a garden or landscape that helps to restore habitat for local wildlife. You can surround yourself with beautiful native plants that will attract an amazing array of native birds, butterflies, helpful bees, and other backyard wildlife species. And here's how it works: native plants are the foundation of wildlife habitat. By planting the native plants that naturally grow in your area, you can restore habitat and invite the wildlife back to the land it once occupied. You all know gardens are works of art. So, your challenge is to create a garden that meets the needs of wildlife and still welcomes people into it. So, let's get started. Our goal this afternoon is to introduce you to many native plants, the leaf eating insects that are attracted to them, and the birds that eat the caterpillars. Let's start with the insects. You know, adult birds may supplement their diets at our feeders, but for most birds, an insect diet is critical. During their exhausting migrations, then the breeding season, and while they're raising their rapidly growing chicks, birds require a huge supply of protein rich insects. Caterpillars are especially important to birds as they are high in protein, easy to see, catch, and digest. So, what's so important about a native plant? This is one that has naturally evolved in a region for thousands of years, without human intervention. They were growing here when Lewis and Clark came through, and in Siouxland back in the 1840s, before the European settlers arrived and made drastic changes to the existing habitat. Now, to thrive and reproduce, most insects require a particular native plant community that co evolved with them. Their larvae, caterpillars, adapted over evolutionary history to overcome chemical defenses of its host plants. Do you remember when you used to shop at the big box stores in the spring and you would go get some pretty, colorful, cheap plants? Huh, those are exotics. Our native insects didn't recognize them. It's like putting our songbirds on a starvation diet. It would be like throwing a party without providing food for our guests. Now you know about Doug Tallamy. And what he is saying is, and I quote, each plant in your landscape you should think of as a bird feeder. It either has food or it doesn't. And now I'll turn it over to Dave. And if you listen carefully, you can probably get 2 or 3 hours of credit when he talks.
Well, I'm just going to summarize just a little bit of some of Doug Tallamy's research, as well as the science to do with why we need to pay attention to our native plants and how many of our native insect species the plants are actually supporting. So, I mean, historically and up till now, roughly 80% or more of the 48 states, so the coterminous 48 states, is now privately managed lands. And so we are, all landowners are either the problem or the solution going forward for our native species. If we want our feathered friends around, we can provide the basis for them to stay around. Now, the problem that we have created here is that we've converted a lot of our private lands to what are now called novel ecosystems. The term novel ecosystem actually simply means that this is an assemblage of plants and animals that really had never before been there on the face of the planet. We have introduced a lot of exotic species, as Dotty said, with the flowers and other plants that we plant in our yards. We have introduced species that have actually taken over and have now caused problems and are actually forcing our native wildlife to decline. We have changed where a lot of our native species are. We have taken them from different parts of the United States and transported them elsewhere. And so what we've done is we've now created a unique assemblage of plants and animals that have not had the opportunity to evolve together. Since they have not had the opportunity to evolve together, that means that a lot of the species are not doing so well anymore. Here's an example of this. As you can see here, this is one of Doug Tallamy's papers. He's the second author on this paper. But I mean, briefly trying to summarize this and not doing it enough justice, our insect species that are native and are herbivores, so they eat our plants, tend to specialize on either one or just a few native plant species. That means that if we eliminate that one plant species that insect needed, obviously it's no longer going to be around in our yards, in our suburban areas, or even in our rural areas. And if we reduce the number of plant species that other insects need, if they need a variety of plant species, they too will be reduced in number. So what we find, and what this paper concludes, is that landscapes of broad regions that have relatively low abundance of native plants also have low insect biomass, abundance, and diversity. So low insect biomass just means that overall there are fewer insects there. Just take all insects, all individual insects of every single species, tally them all up, there are just fewer insects there. Abundance means that when you look at any particular species, there is going to be fewer members of that particular species. And then diversity means there's fewer overall insect species that are represented in these landscapes. So when we don't plant with native plants, we're actually reducing insects. And why is that a problem for our feathered friends? Because the majority of terrestrial birds use insects as their primary source of food, at least during the reproductive time of their life. So for instance, the cedar waxwing, which was the bird that was featured on the first slide, is well known as a frugivore. A frugivore means it primarily eats fruit. So it loves berries, it loves, the fruits of the chokecherry tree, that sort of thing. But during reproduction, they will eat a lot of insects because those growing young need a high protein diet. So here's an example of how our native birds are affected when the native trees go away, or not native trees, but native plants in general are reduced. Now, again, this comes from the paper that was co-authored by Doug Tallamy. Doug Tallamy works in the eastern United States. So I'm using the Carolina chickadee here as one of the examples from his paper. There are other birds in the example as well. Carolina chickadee normally doesn't make it up to Iowa. We have the black-capped chickadee here. But if you look at the graph on the right, what has been identified here, and again, this is not just with the Carolina chickadee, this is across several bird species, is there seems to be a threshold, an ecological threshold. When there is a greater than 30% non-native plant biomass, we find that the abundance of the Carolina chickadees declines. Again, um, there are a lot more bird species that need to be studied, but there are many more bird species than just the Carolina chickadee that have already been studied. And that 30% seems to be a threshold. It's kind of an average threshold. As you can see here, as non-native plant percentage across the landscape increases, it doesn't take much. Only about 10% of non-native plants, you're seeing a decline in the Carolina chickadee populations. But once you get above 30%, you're seeing a very drastic decline. And so that's the general conclusion right now in the scientific literature. More non-native plants equals fewer native birds. And the link between them is more non-native plants means fewer native insects, means fewer native birds. So overall conclusion before I turn this back to Dotty, native plants are essential for our native insects, and our native insects are essential for our native birds. So if we want our birds around, and who doesn't love feeding the birds and seeing the birds and watching the birds, well, then we need to landscape with native plants.
We're going to start with native trees and shrubs. Native trees, shrubs, and other woodland plants provide the first food for pollinators in the spring. They are especially beneficial because the density of their blossoms helps pollinators forage more efficiently. You might think of them as meadows in the sky. Now, native trees have evolved with competing species, predators, and diseases over thousands of years and are better adapted to the local temperatures and rainfall, and thus provide superior habitat for native wildlife. And as Dave said, non-native species become weedy and have the potential to spread quickly and dominate, often pushing out our native plants and animals. The following information on our slides today is based on Audubon Native Plants Database and National Wildlife Native Plant Finder. Those addresses will be on one of the concluding slides at the end of our talk. So what you will do is you will go to one of those sites, you will put in your zip code, and you will be revealed to the native plants, the insects, and birds in your area. So for today, for this discussion, we are using zip code 51104. So here's the bur oak, the mighty bur oak. Don't we all love to see this tree? It is so handsome. It can grow up to 100 feet high, and it can spread to almost 80 feet, depending on how much space it has. Oh no, I know what you're going to say. Yeah, but it's a slow grower and I'll never get to sit under it. Oh, yes, you will. It can be 5 feet and you can sit under it, 10 feet and you can sit under it and have a picnic. So don't let that stop you from purchasing a bur oak. And you can see this is on our Wild Ones plant sale. So especially this tree has more wildlife value than any other tree species. And 60 species of birds use the cavities and other parts for nesting and shelter. And the acorns, oh my, they are utilized by a wide variety of wildlife. The bark is a whitish gray with deep furrows and is fire resistant. It prefers full sun and dry to medium soil moisture. And this tree is native to all 7 counties in the Loess Hills landform. The fall foliage is a golden yellow brown and it is deer resistant. Now, Dr. Talamy has written a new book called The Nature of Oaks, the rich ecology of our most essential trees. It contains information highlighting the seasonal cycles of life, death, and the renewal of oaks. And it celebrates the wonders that occur in our yards and landscapes. He hopes to inspire the reader to plant, nurture, and protect them. Publication date is March 30th, so you can pre-order if you wish.
And I will let you know that we have a couple different things on this slide. The first I'm going to point out are the species totals. So on the left, between the adult butterflies and the caterpillar, you can see 276 species listed. But at the top right, you can see what we're calling the Talamy tally, which is 543 species. So what this means is that if on the left, 276 species, that is the general scientific understanding of how many native insect species will spend at least part of their life cycle utilizing the bur oak. But Doug Talamy has done more in-depth studies in the last 20, 25 years and has updated that, as you can see, rather substantially with the bur oak. 543, he's tallied 543 native insect species actually using the bur oak for at least part of their life cycle. So, what is one of the insects that is known to use the bur oak? Well, in Northwest Iowa, we have the red-spotted admiral, or what's known as the white admiral. You can see there are 2 color morphs here, and I included both because it depends on which part of the country you're in, whether or not you'll see one or both color morphs. And you can see here the caterpillar is very interesting because it blends in so well with this lichen-covered twig. But also, if you look at it from afar, it looks a little bit more like a bird dropping, which is one of the ways that caterpillars often blend in and try to say, nope, I'm not food. In the lower right, there's an example of a bird that either might use the bur oak for part of its life cycle, like nesting, raising young, that sort of thing, or more likely will eat the insects that utilize the tree. The American redstart is one of our warblers that returns every spring. They are an insect specialist, and so they would be looking for the caterpillars, such as the caterpillar of the red-spotted admiral. Last thing I'll point out here is that in the right center, we say Wild Ones plant sale, and we've tried to point out where, on every slide, look for that blue Wild Ones plant sale to see whether or not it's on the plant sale here in 2021.
The choke cherry is 30 feet tall, tolerates full sun to parched shade. It likes dry to moist soil, so it's excellent for an understory planting. Because choke cherry can spread, it can be valuable for erosion control. It has beautiful white flowers that bloom in May and June, and then produce clusters of deep purple berries that 84 species of birds have been known to feed on. And it makes a delicious jam or jelly. This tree is not deer resistant.
And the cherries themselves can be eaten by birds that will eat berries and fruits, such as the cedar waxwing. However, the waxwing will also look for caterpillars, especially during the reproductive season. And one of the caterpillars that is known to utilize the chokecherry is one you may have seen around Siouxland a lot. I've seen them crossing sidewalks, crossing roads. When I first moved to Sioux City, I was like, wow, how many of these things are there around? It's the woolly bear. And you can see the actual moth that the woolly bear will transform into as long as it's allowed to complete its life cycle and not eaten by a bird. Again, the Talamy tally here, the chokecherry, the picture here is obviously a young representative of chokecherry, but 456 native insect species in the United States are known to actually use the chokecherry. And that's an update of the scientific literature, which had previously tallied, only, quote, 254 species. I'll also just now say one more thing. Dotty has a lot of good information for you about our native plants. And so from now on, I will only be interjecting here and there to talk about the bird or the insect that is pictured. And it'll mostly be Dotty talking about the plants.
Oh, and here's the pussy willow. Its mature height can reach 20 feet, and the silky catkins open well before other spring blooms, so provide an early source of pollen and a superior food source for bees. Its clustered, upright trunks make good cover and nesting for a variety of birds. It does like plenty of sun and it does like moisture, but who doesn't like to bring in stems of young furry catkins to watch them blossom in early spring? Ah, this is not deer resistant.
And here I'll just interject to just point out one of my favorite birds. I fell in love with this species when I first took ornithology as an undergraduate student more years ago than I care to remember now. The rose-breasted grosbeak. This is the male that is pictured. The female looks like a very large sparrow. The rose-breasted grosbeak is known as a seed specialist. As you can see, look at the size of that beak, hence the name grosbeak, large beak. But again, during the reproductive cycle, they will eat a lot of insects to help them get through all of the rigors of actually raising young, but also to bring back to the nest so that the young have all of the protein they need to grow that amazing feathered coat.
In answer to that last question, the scientific name for pussy willow is Salix discolor. Salix discolor. Next, we have the box elder, a species of maple, another huge tree, 50 feet tall. And notice the crown, how irregular it is looking. This is a fast growing tree, but beware if you're going to plant it, make sure that you get a male tree because they are generally considered to be better landscaping trees because they don't have messy flowers and seed clusters that fall to the ground and need to be raked. And those come off of the female trees. This is a deer resistant tree.
One little note about the oriole that's actually pictured here, the orchard oriole. Of course, you'll also see the Baltimore or northern oriole in northwest Iowa. They make these amazing weaver bird nests where they will take grasses and actually weave them around a twig and then they hang down below. And actually, the females will often judge the males on the quality of the nest that they're actually able to make. So just think about that. I'm certainly glad that I don't have to build a house to impress a female, but a lot of these orioles, that's what they have to do. Some of them, however, will pair up and both participate in actually building their home. Oops, now I'm trying to go forward. There we go.
If you saw that, that's our daughter Amy in Reno, Nevada. Okay, the American elm. You know, all these trees are huge. They're 100 feet tall. But look at this tree closely. Notice the graceful upward spreading branches, and it almost forms a vase for the crown. Really a beautiful tree. And it's a good tree because it's adaptable to fluctuating moisture levels that make it well suited to a garden setting. It has rather subtle blooms in April, but it has a beautiful golden yellow foliage color in the fall. Oh, the birds and the small mammals love the fruit from this tree and the cover that it provides. And it is deer resistant. Oh, you're not saying anything, Dave?
No, I'll let you go forward. I for some of these, I won't say anything.
Okay. Okay. The basswood or linden, which is one of our favorite trees. I'll tell you why in a few minutes. Another giant tree, and it prefers well-drained soil, but it will grow moderately well in sun or shade. It produces, oh, fragrant, beautiful, golden yellow flowers in June and July. And when those flowers are blooming, it's considered a bee tree because it is favored by local bees and honeybees for the nectar produced. Bill and I have a good time with our grandson because our linden trees grow on the gravel road on the west side of our property, and the flowers are pretty high. So we have to get in the back of a pickup truck and stand there and pick the flowers. It's always a special occasion. Um, and we love to pick those flowers because we dry them and it makes an absolutely delicious tea. The soft wood of this tree is also important for cavity nesting animals. And basswood is highly prized by woodcovers and musical instrument makers because its soft wood has something to do with the sound that is produced.
The red-bellied woodpecker is one of the species that's known to use these. Woodpeckers actually will utilize a variety of different trees, but also perhaps not as well known is they will actually come down into our yards and occasionally eat seeds and nuts and even berries, especially outside of the reproductive season. Also, if you like to have moths around your home that are basically so large that they're sometimes mistaken for being a hummingbird, the blinded sphinx is one of the moths that is known to live on the basswood.
Now, Dave and I hesitated on this tree to include it, but then we decided that you might be interested in the history of the ash tree. This tree was widely planted to replace the elms that um, died following the Dutch elm disease. It was commonly planted in residential settings because it was tolerant of conditions of soil, texture, and moisture. And the birds did eat the seeds from the tree. The green ash is used for making furniture, a wide variety of tool handles, um, sporting equipment, and I'm sure they still make some baseball bats out of the green ash. But since the threat of the emerald ash borer in the Midwest, many cities are cutting them down, and I don't know how many nurseries may have stopped stocking this one-time mainstay of the landscaping industry. Hard to believe, isn't it? Ah, the black walnut tree. It's another large tree. And don't let this stop you because of these large trees. I'm sure some of you will have um, open space to plant them, or maybe you have moved into a new home with nothing growing, and you might want to consider some of these beautiful trees. Now, the black walnut tree has dark green and very aromatic foliage. It does produce growth inhibiting toxin that affects the surrounding plants. It is not drought tolerant and thus poorly adapted to a highly urbanized setting. The blooms are subtle, May and June. The foliage is a beautiful yellow in the fall. It is highly valued for nuts, which is quality food for squirrels and humans fortunate enough to crack the sturdy shell. It is used to make furniture, gun stocks, and veneer, and is probably one, if not the most highly valued native hardwood in Iowa. And this is deer resistant. The rough leaf dogwood reaches a height of 20 feet, prefers sun, part shade, tolerant to drought once it's established. Look at those pretty white blossoms. It spreads, forms colonies, so it occurs as a dense thicket of intertwined branches. And for this reason, and because of the production of fruit called drupes, Drupes, that ripen in the fall, this shrub is used in windbreaks and wildlife plantings. 93 species of birds, 93 species of birds use this shrub for a food source. But beware, don't plant it near the street. It is not salt tolerant, and it is not deer resistant either.
And I'll just point out here, our eastern bluebird, we had the story right before we started the presentation of one person who had 30 bluebirds in their yard. There are a couple populations of eastern bluebirds, just like there are a couple populations of our American robins. One population will actually migrate south, but the other population will often stay here over winter. So over winter, what do bluebirds eat? They specialize on insects in the spring and summer months when they're trying to nest and raise their young. But here in winter, they will eat a variety of berries and seeds that are left over. And so they kind of have a seasonal diet that way. They become much more seed, nut, and berry eaters in the winter months and then specialize on insects in the summer months.
Oh, the hackberry. Once you see the bark on this tree, you will never forget it because it is wart-like, gray, little outgrowths all over the tree trunk that are rough and just so exciting to see. They grow in a variety of soils and they like sun or shade. Now, a hackberry tree is not nearly as important as the oaks, but they do have a few specific butterfly species that are unique to them. They also supply sugar berries as food for 48 documented bird species, and they also use that seed for cover. Uh, it's planted for ornament, and it's also planted for nesting cover. Um, the fruit persists throughout the winter, and that's an important food source for birds and small.
Measure your canoe paddle.
birds and small mammals.
Like new pets.
It is now listen to this. It's a semi-deer resistant, as the deer will browse the leaves only in the absence of their preferred browse species.
So deer look down a little bit, but okay, we'll take it.
Yeah.
The black-capped chickadee will have fun in the hackberries. The black-capped chickadee is a great bird to attract to your yard. It's really an omnivore. It'll eat a variety of insects. It'll eat a variety of seeds as well as fruits. The black-cap is one of the very few bird species that has the strength in its toes and legs to actually hang upside down on, say, a suet feeder and actually feed from the bottom of the feeder. Otherwise, you pretty much only have woodpeckers around here that are able to do that. There are very few species that are actually able to do that. A couple of the nuthatches might. They also can actually use their bills kind of like a woodpecker. So they can take a rather large sunflower seed and they'll actually drill it open. Otherwise, their bills are just too small to handle seeds of those size, but they get around it. Plus, the black-capped chickadee is very bold and inquisitive. If you're very patient with this particular bird species, you can actually train it to come up and take seed, either like if you wear a sombrero and you put seed in the hat, they'll actually land on top of your head then, and they'll actually eat the seeds there. And I haven't done this myself. I really want to, but I've known of people who actually train them. You stand very, very still and you put seed right in the palm of your hand. And eventually you can get them, as long as you're still, to actually come up and take some seed right out of your hand. And then for this butterfly, the question mark, I just wanted to point out, I was finally able to find pictures, not only of the caterpillar and the adult, but also of the pupal stage as well.
Very nice, Dave. Good job. And our final tree shrub today is the smooth sumac. It can grow up to 20 feet high, and it has this is an open spreading shrub by underground root suckers. Thus, it's not good for a manicured garden. It likes sun. In the fall, it will have a beautiful color. You can see the leaf colors, kind of a dark maroon, and the fruits are a dark red. This makes it a beautiful fall plant in a naturalized setting, and it provides food long into the winter when birds and other wildlife really depend upon it. 98 bird species eat the fruits that are produced only by the female plant, and it is not deer resistant. And that concludes our trees and shrubs. And now we're going to get into the flowers and the grasses. Each autumn, goldenrods adorn the roadsides, native landscapes, and gardens across North America. For gardeners, these bright flowers signal the end of summer and the beginning of the cool, sunny days of autumn. Did you know there are almost 100 species of Solidago, that's the genus, around the world, but mostly they are native to North America. Goldenrods can range in size from a foot to more than 6 feet. The species in our area are tall goldenrod, field goldenrod, and showy goldenrod. And the stiff goldenrod is one of the plants on our sale. The stiff goldenrod prefers full to part sun. It can grow 5 feet high, and it flowers in August through October. The birds like to perch on the flat flower stems, and the seeds are important for late season bird food. And my, oh my, do the monarchs love these plants. When they are in full bloom, it's like fireworks all over the prairie. We need to have that song playing now, don't we? The other species is the zigzag goldenrod, and that is on our plant sale as well. And this would be a really good choice for adding color and interest to a fall woodland, as it tolerates part sun and shade. Can you guess why it is named the zigzag goldenrod? And this is deer resistant.
And the bird that I pictured here on this page is the blue jay, which may surprise you because blue jays are associated with woodlands. And generally, if you want blue jays in and around your yard, then you should have trees somewhere in the neighborhood. But there are a lot of birds that like edge habitats and that will come down and eat the insects that are actually growing on flowers such as the goldenrod. And the blue jay is known to be one of them.
I love that slide with the bright blue jay and all the yellow flowers with it. That was so nice, Dave. Sunflower. This is on, you see, this is on our plant sale, and it will be called either the early, the false, or oxeye sunflower. Now, summertime on the prairie and in your garden probably is almost a parade of composite flowers. And this one is often the first to show. It is easy to grow. It's quick to develop, blooms profusely for quite a while on thin stems of the foliage. It can reach a height of 6 feet in full sun. It thrives in moisture, but you know, it tolerates the dry soil and it's good for problem soils. And it is deer resistant. Joe pieweed, we have the 2 species on our sale this year. The first one is spotted Joe pieweed. Notice how pie is spelled. These large clusters of dusty rose-colored torch-like flowers will bloom for many weeks in July and August, and it becomes an absolute magnet for dozens of species of butterflies. It likes moist soil and it thrives in a sunny garden spot. It can reach a height of 6 feet and it is not deer resistant. The second plant we have is purple or sweet Joe pieweed. If this is a plant for you, if you like the sun-loving Joe pieweed, but you have too much shade, because it is happy in the shade. It can reach a height of 6 to 7 feet. Now this is interesting. It has a vanilla scent that is irresistible to swallowtails and monarchs and many other pollinators. But you know what? It is deer resistant. Those deer don't like that vanilla scent.
And Dottie just mentioned the pollinators, and we have, of course, a picture here of one of our species of bumblebees. There are several species of bumblebees, and I just want to also highlight that if we plant these native plants, they will also be food for our native pollinators. As you know, pollinators are in decline in the upper Midwest, in the United States, and throughout North America and Europe, definitely. And so by planting these native plants, we can also support our pollinators, which in turn obviously supports the plants themselves, which in turn supports other insects, which in turn supports our feathered friends. It's all the great circle of life.
And at this point, I should say that when you go into one of these databases and put in your zip code, you will see many more species of birds and many more pollinators and larvae. I mean, we just chose the ones that we thought would be significant. That question was, which was
deer resistant.
Which was the deer resistant, and that was the sweet, the purpureum, sweet, purple sweet Joe pieweed. The common bone set. And as I'm talking, if you would look at the lower right-hand blossom on the picture, and I'm sorry, the left hand corner, and look, concentrate on the leaves and the stem, because I'm going to explain that. And I think that's the best place to see it. These are plants with stems and leaves covered with some little hairs. Each pair of long, tapered, opposite leaves is united across the stem so that the stem appears to pierce the leaf pair. Can you see that? Beautiful white flowers stand out in the late summer landscape. These plants are about 4 feet tall, and based on the appearance of the fused pair of leaves, people once believed that a potion made from this plant would heal fractured bones. I don't know.
I will point out one of what I thought was a significant species that actually use this is significance because it is, I think, unusual. So the wavy lined emerald moth, as you can see, it looks like a delicate little light green moth. You can see the wavy white lines that go through the wings there, hence how it got its name. But notice its caterpillar. Its caterpillar is camouflage. Of course, it's not pictured on a common bone set. It would be fantastic if I had that picture. But anyway, the caterpillar actually has evolved to mimic the decaying petals of a flower. So that's how it tries to actually avoid being eaten by birds.
Very interesting. The black-eyed Susan. Cheerful blossoms on these plants just liven up your garden wherever you put them. They can bloom from June almost to October. They can become aggressive though, so beware if you are giving them too perfect an environment with not enough competition. They can reach a height of 2 feet. Birds enjoy the ripe seeds, and it's on our plant sale, as you can see, and it is deer resistant.
And I pictured here a downy woodpecker, which might seem very weird for a black-eyed Susan, but woodpeckers are known to actually perch on top of the flower heads of a lot of our native flowers. The black-eyed Susan, some of our sunflowers, and other flowers they'll actually utilize because A, they might eat some of the insects that are actually there, and B, just as Dottie said, a species like the downy woodpecker will actually perch on top of the black-eyed Susan and eat the seeds itself.
Planting milkweeds is a simple act that can contribute beauty, ecological healing, and increase your backyard diversity. Once common, now in dramatic decline, milkweeds are a critical food and nectar source for monarchs and legions of other butterflies. We have 3 choices on our sale. The butterfly is the great milkweed for a sunny, dry location. And a mature plant can sprout almost 20 stems so that it appears kind of like bushy. Very, very neat. It can be up to 3 feet tall. And of course, it is the host plant for monarchs. Now, Native Americans used the roots as food, where European settlers used the roots as medicine. The 2 other milkweeds that are available on our plant sale are poke milkweed. It prefers sun to shade. It can handle average to dry soil. It can reach a height of 5 feet. And the last plant on this sale is the marsh or rose milkweed. It thrives in sunny, medium to wet soils, and it can reach a height of 4 feet. It has a lovely vanilla fragrance. And if you remember one of the last flowers I was talking about, that vanilla fragrance caused the deer to not like it. And here again, milkweeds are deer resistant.
And of course, as Dottie said, they're well known for supporting our monarchs that have concerned all of us with their decline as well. The monarch, of course, becomes noxious or toxic to birds, but the reason that it's toxic is because it actually eats that milky sap of the milkweeds and incorporates that sap into its tissues. But one of the other lepidopterans that actually uses the milkweed for food, especially as a caterpillar, that I think is just absolutely beautiful, and I'd love to see more of them, is the Cecropia silk moth.
I have to apologize. It's only the rose milkweed that has that lovely vanilla fragrance and is deer resistant. Um, yarrow. Now these may look a little lavender, but actually the native yarrow is white. It can grow to 3 feet. It's kind of unbranched. Aromatic leaves are kind of feathery, almost fern-like. Again, the flower heads are in a flat branching cluster, and they bloom in spring to early fall. The plant has been known for its antiseptic properties and formerly used to pack wounds. It's also used it was used for a treatment of tooth and earaches. Oh, I don't know if it's deer resistant, but I would guess it is because of that antiseptic property.
I'm just going forward to the wild columbine.
Wild columbine, and this is on our plant sale. This is one of the first plants to provide nectar in the spring for pollinators, and especially for hummingbirds. It is an early bloomer that is easy to grow from seed, and you will have success with it in full sun or shade. It can reach up to 2 feet in height, and it is deer resistant.
And of course, the hummingbirds, probably the most common hummingbird up in Iowa and the upper Midwest in general is the ruby-throated hummingbird. And if you know your hummingbirds, you can tell that the female is pictured on the left and the male is pictured on the right here. How can you tell that? Well, both have this lovely, beautiful green iridescent back. And of course, when they're flying, who doesn't pause and just watch the amazing flight pattern of these birds? They can actually fly up, down, backwards, and forwards with their amazing wing pattern, just like a helicopter. But only the male develops that wonderful ruby colored throat that it advertises not only to the female, but to other males to say, I'm more dominant than you, keep out, this is my territory.
This cordgrass is a good choice if you have the invasive reed canary grass and for other non-native grasses. This is especially good for stabilizing the soil near the water's edge or a wet area. The arching summer foliage, I mean, look how pretty that is, turns that bright gold in autumn. And yeah, it prefers sun and moisture, and its height can reach 9 feet. It is not deer resistant. Ah, the prairie sage or the white sage. This spreads by rhizome, so can form dense colonies that give the distinctive silver green accent to a planting in your garden, a sunny site. I just love the difference that can make in a garden next to something bright red or bright yellow. It blooms in August through September, and if you take the leaves in your fingers and crush them, can you guess the aroma? It is not deer resistant. Evidently, deer like sage. The bee balm or wild bergamot, and this is on our plant sale. This plant has just lovely violet blossoms and a distinctive aromatic foliage. You can even use the fresh leaves to brew a mint flavored tea. It blooms from July through September, and it is common in an upland dry prairie. A mass of it is just beautiful in the fall, and it is deer resistant. They don't like that aromatic foliage. The prairie flax. Oh my, if you can see a prairie blooming in the spring with this, oh, it's just beautiful. They can be nearly white, two shades of purple, and even pink. And they do have a slight fragrance, but not enough to keep the deer away. It is not deer resistant. It is ideal for butterflies, and they will land on the petals and they will um, go to the narrow tube in the center of the flower, and it's ideal for a moth or a butterfly tongue. It blooms May, maybe even to the end of June. And the meadow blazing star, this is also on our plant sale. This beautiful liatris should be your first choice for attracting monarchs to the sunny location in your garden. It's like a huge magnet. Those buds reveal the beautiful, brilliant purple pink flowers that bloom from August to September. And oh my, goldfinches love the seeds. It can grow up to 5 feet tall. It is not deer resistant. They like that color, I guess. Little blue stem. This is one of my favorite shorter grasses. And this is on our plant sale. And look at these pictures. They just capture how beautiful it is. It's just that softening look that you might want in your garden. This shorter grass can reach up to 3 to 4 feet high. It has the most beautiful blue hue in summer. And after a rain, that blue gets even darker. It is gorgeous. And then after frost, it gets a coppery pink color. You have to see it to really explain it. It's a good choice for medium to dry soil gardens, not recommended for heavy soil. And I just love that softening look. Perfect for a backdrop for your native prairie flowers in the summer. And it is deer resistant. And the prairie drop seed. This is also on our plant sale. It is the most popular native grass for landscaping. Look at those beautiful, slender, arching blades. And then the cloud-like seed heads, just kind of wispy looking. Now it will make a very nice, well-defined garden border when planted. Aha, but you need to plant it at least 18 to 24 inches apart. Native Americans made flour from these seeds. Amazing. Blooms August through September, and it's deer resistant also.
And one of the interesting things that I had not known before we put these together is that wild turkeys have been documented eating the seeds of the prairie dropseed plant. A bird that large eating seeds that small.
I know, amazing. And we have plenty of wild turkeys around, don't we? Oh, the yellow or gray-headed coneflower. It just produces a cornucopia of flowers in the heat of summer. This is an exceptionally durable native plant. It survives the heat, drought, flooding, and the winter. This is a classic prairie favorite, easy to grow from seeds or from plants. Now, if you look carefully, those cone-like green centers eventually will change to like a almost a purplish brown, if that makes sense, but it does look like that. And it's surrounded by those soft yellow drooping petals. It's an excellent cut flower in arrangements. Yeah, it grows 3 to 5 feet. Oh, wait, it's not deer resistant. So if you're going to pick them for a flower arrangement, you better get out there before the deer get there. The purple coneflower. This is a drought-tolerant garden favorite. It blooms profusely in mid to late summer, likes fertile soil and full sun to part shade. And the purple blooms are loved by bees and butterflies.
I pictured here the dick thistle. It makes one of our extraordinary migrations that goes between North America here and South America. And as they pass through, they follow the land. And as they pass across the Isthmus of Panama, which of course we just call Panama today, and go into Venezuela and then make their way from there, farmers in Venezuela consider the dick thistle to be like grasshoppers. They're pests that just kind of eat their entire fields, because they're all concentrated. The entire North American crop of dick thistles is concentrated there for a few weeks. But here in Northwest Iowa, you can see these birds around in our prairies, in our open areas, and in our wetlands quite a lot. And then I pictured here the Otto skipper. And as you can see here, this is an endangered little moth, and it still is known to exist in a couple patches here in western Iowa. Notice that historically, the Otto skipper and there are a couple different subspecies, the range extended all the way down to South Carolina, that's the SC, but now it's been greatly, greatly reduced, and planting something like a purple coneflower may actually help to keep this species alive.
The purple coneflower is deer resistant as well. And you know, the song of that dick thistle is the same song over and over. Chee, 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 chee. Okay, and our final flower is the pale purple coneflower. And this is on our plant sale. And it's drought resistant, and it's an early summer bloomer during June and July, and an early nectar source for pollinators. Birds eat the seeds in the fall, and it can reach a height of 3 to 5 feet. And this too is deer resistant. I missed that. What was that? The question.
Something about the sage.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I missed that question about the sage.
We can go back to it right after our
Oh,
talk. I'm missing questions in the chat too.
Okay, Elisa answered it. Sorry. Okay, that concludes the flowers and grasses. So now that you know how important it is to plant natives in your garden, you need to know how to manage your habitat. So birds need 4 components, 4 habitat components. Food. Come on, all living things need to eat to survive. So these food sources are critical. For seeds, you might want to delay deadheading the seed heavy stalks so they have a continued food source. Berries and nuts can produce late, and they can be used well into the winter. The nectar, hummingbirds need that nectar. And foliage and twigs, you've heard lots about this probably, to put them in the back of your garden beds. They encourage grubs and insects that the birds and other wildlife rely on. Put some suet out in the winter, and and, and the birds need um, uh, a feeder, bird feeder, a squirrel feeder to keep the birds away, or to keep the squirrels away from the bird feeders. And go online, you can find a butterfly feeder as well. The second thing they need is water. Wildlife needs clean drinking water, and the birds need it to bathe in order to keep their feathers in good condition. You can you don't have to have anything fancy, just a simple dish, a simple bird bath. But if you have a little waterfall or a little bubbler, that's really extra special. Cover. The birds need cover. Now think about this. In the heat of summer, or in a rainstorm, or in snow, birds need a place to shelter in these weather extremes. And they need a place to hide, to feel safe from people and predators. And native vegetation especially provides that. And finally, a place to raise their young. If you want the birds to return to your yard, you need to keep them, those little babies, alive, and you need those birds to keep producing, reproducing. So you need a sheltered place, nesting box, tree cavities, prairie, or shrub or thicket.
And I will note here that the bird feeding her young that is pictured here is a northern cardinal. And the young, of course, for a number of bird species, they don't just stay in the nest until they're ready to fledge and leave the nest, but they'll walk outside the nest, they'll make short flights, that sort of thing. So they need a lot of cover to keep them safe from the weather and the predators until they actually are mature enough to leave mom and dad and strike out on their own.
Oh, I thought we were done.
Just one more.
So 3 practices you need to manage your habitat. The first is soil and water conservation. Limit your water use with a drip or a soaker hose, but actually native plants don't require as much water as those petunias do. Although there is a native petunia, isn't there? And reduce erosion and mulch. Use your mulch. You need to control the exotics by starting to remove your non-natives, little at a time, and put in those native plants. And also reduce your lawn. If you can reduce that a little bit at a time as well. And finally, please eliminate chemical pesticides and fertilizers and use your compost.
And as Dotty mentioned at the beginning, here are the links to the National Wildlife Federation Native Plant Finder and the National Audubon Society Native Plant Database. And you can go in there and again, just put in your region by zip code, or sometimes I believe the National Wildlife Federation particularly you can search by certain city locales as well. And then the Iowa Department of Transportation has the Guide to the Common Trees and Shrubs of Iowa for some further information. And then Wild Ones, but the Prairie Edge chapter up in Minnesota, and Dottie's holding it up right there, has Attracting Birds to Your Garden with Native Plants.
And we have many of these copies of these books that we hope to share with all of you at some point when we're face to face, or maybe when you come pick up your plants at our plant sale. Thank you so much